Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to very cordially welcome you all to today's M100 award in the state capital of Potsdam. At the same time, I would like to welcome some very special guests. First of all, of course, our award winner, Shabosh Stuhl. So a very warm welcome, Shabosh Stuhl, and thank you very much for coming here. The laudatory speech, ladies and gentlemen, will be presented by the Human Rights Commissioner of the European Council, the Council of Europe, Dunja Mijatovic. She will join us via the video stream later on. A warm welcome to her. I would also like to welcome Mayor Exner. A very warm welcome to you too. And I would have loved to have welcomed our Minister of Finance and Vice Chancellor Olaf Scholz at this moment in time. Unfortunately, however, he is still out on the Autobahn, the highway, so he will be a bit late. I think he will arrive in round about 10 minutes, and then he will be able to address us this evening. That will be the political speech of this evening. Furthermore, I would like to communicate to you that unfortunately our Lord Mayor Mike Schubert will not be able to be present tonight. He fell ill. Of course, we wish him a speedy recovery. Someone else who cannot be present this night is Moritz van Dömen. It's rather ironic, but starting today, he has to quarantine because someone of his friends tested positive. And that is why Corona also shows its head and rears its head at this point in time. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a special challenge to host a special event like M100 and organize it during Corona times. And I do have to admit that in the board we had discussions going on as to whether we would be able to have this event this year. But I think it was the right decision to decide to meet despite the difficult situation, against the backdrop of the fact that we all have to deal with the social, economic, and political consequences of the corona pandemic. It is, of course, important that we find an international format in this context, and this is, of course, the goal of M100, so that we can deal with these topics at the end of the day. So surely it would be to capitulate in view of the crisis to maybe postpone or cancel the event. And that is why I would like to thank the board extraordinarily. They had very long and intensive discussions around this topic and had to adapt to ever-changing situations. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen of the board, for your very strong commitment. Ladies and gentlemen, a hybrid event such as we have today, in my opinion, also has its upsides, against the backdrop that this afternoon the M100 conference took place digitally, and this was characterized by the fact that very many renowned participants could attend. I am not sure whether they all could have made it here physically if they had had to travel here. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, there are also upsides that come from this crisis. I already mentioned that this is a hybrid event, the benefit of this being that we can personally bestow the award, which is something of utmost importance, to have this done in a personal context, even though, of course, this takes place in a bit of a different way than we are used to. But I think this is also part of it, and awards, if possible, should be bestowed personally. Ladies and gentlemen, during the phase of the award, we also cannot do without digital components. Vera Jurovic, the Vice President of the European Commission, will give us her words of welcome in a moment. I hope we all have a wonderful event, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we also have one marked by dignity, even though it has to take place under more difficult circumstances. And now Vera Jurovic will speak to us.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure and honor to be, although only virtually, with you. The colloquium focuses this year on the post-COVID media order. There are already many lessons that can be learned from this crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has clearly demonstrated the essential role of journalists. Journalists have been working in the front line, sometimes putting their safety at risk to inform us. Readership and audiences have been record high, but revenues have been record low. The crisis has amplified pre-existing trends. The economic situation of the media sector was already fragile before the crisis, with the digitalization and increasing power of online platforms getting the bulk of advertising revenues. But media are not only losing money, they are also losing people. Even here in Europe, journalists are murdered. Journalists Daphne Caruana Galizia, Jan Kuciak, and also members of the team of French magazine Charlie Hebdo, which received the M100 Media Award in 2015. All these attacks make the media sector more vulnerable to those who want to interfere and impose their narratives. This means that our democracies are weakened as a result, because media are not only an economic sector, they are the pillar of democracy. You may know that before 1989 I lived in a country, communist Czechoslovakia, where there was no freedom of speech, there was no pluralism of media or even of thought. And I am absolutely sure this should belong to the past. It should never be part of our future, nowhere in Europe. Yet, the trends we see in some countries make me really concerned. Too often I see politicians trying to reduce criticism to fake news, trying to influence ownership of the media and content of the stories. We will shed some more light on these issues in the first edition of the Rule of Law report, including on measures put in place for the safety of journalists for each country in the EU. Building on this analysis, we will present a series of initiatives by the end of the year to strengthen democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights, and to help the media sector recover. Our historic recovery plan should also support the media sector while fully respecting its independence. We will also look very closely at the application of new rules on audiovisual media services. They notably strengthen the independence of media regulators and encourage transparency of media ownership. We are very determined to continue co-funding a series of projects that support cross-border investigative journalists and provide legal aid to those who need it. This is what the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom in Leipzig is doing. Ladies and gentlemen, the job of journalists is to look at the hands of those in power and keep them in check. George Orwell said that journalism is printing what someone else does not want to publish. This is why I am pleased that tonight we applaud and pay tribute to Szabolcs Dúl. Mr. Dúl, you have been standing and fighting for journalism. I also would like to pay tribute to many in your team who made the difficult decision to resign and are now starting a new project, Telex. I would like to give them my best wishes of success. And also my commitment that I am looking into all possible ways to improve the situation of media pluralism and freedom in the EU. Because in the post-COVID media order that I would like to see, journalists everywhere on our continent will be able to do their jobs freely and safely, in full independence and in fair economic conditions. It is the only way forward for democracy to thrive. Thank you.
Sehr geehrte Frau Kommissarin für
Commissioner for Human Rights, Vice Chancellor, who just arrived, Mr. Dole, members of the board. My name is Leonard Nofi, and I'm a member of the M100 board and work for the Institute for Media and Communication Policy. And I now am asked to summarize the outcomes of the digital meeting. Hundreds of experts came together, and up to an hour they discussed Neustadt, the future of the media order. I can only fail in doing that, and that is why I would only like to highlight some of the aspects and also would like to say what motivated us in planning this event. The M100 Sans Souci Colloquium is a special one for several reasons. The logistics was special, as John Jacobs just explained, but also thinking of the content. We meet 75 years after the end of the Second World War, 30 years after the German reunification, and in year one of the pandemic. COVID-19 led to insecurity, ambivalence, and a permanent living day by day. Surely also for you, above all, political decision makers, Vice Chancellor. But we then were able to focus on things that really matter, and free journalism is part of it. The end of the Nazi rule 75 years ago and the end of the Cold War are inextricably linked with this ideal. And one of the premises of that we had within the M100 board was that media freedom, pluralism, and journalism at the service of democracy in Europe are jeopardized more than they ever were, more than they were jeopardized in many decades. The acute dangers would be discussed during this context. If we would have discussed this matter 10 years ago, then oftentimes comments could be heard like, oh, it's nice that you look into the topic of journalism and international journalism. I once wrote a book about the European public, and I know what I'm talking about. Not many people were interested. And the public, or nowadays you would call this the information architecture in Europe, is not only a topic for specialist politics or philosophy classes, but this is the pillar and the main question for the future of Europe. It is relevant to all of us, and this is what we discussed this afternoon too. The challenges linked to this are being intensely discussed by the society, but nonetheless, sometimes what we lose out of sight is what it all could lead up to. This is reason enough for looking into the following question. How will our democratic media landscape, thinking of economic and social changes, will look like in 10 years from now? And also, and maybe this is even more important, what is it that we can do nowadays to design this change in a constructive and positive way? This exceptional situation not only showed us that people working at a supermarket or healthcare professionals are relevant to the system, but also journalists. But again, these record reach of newspapers in the past months, for example, and the increased trust and confidence in news media cannot cover that there is a massive crisis in journalism, and this has become worse during the recession post-COVID-19. We talked about AIDS and support programs, and the publishing companies are entitled to this, as every other company is too. Commissioner Jurova also talked about this. Nonetheless, one of the messages that I take away from today is that this is not sufficient. Our public realm is at a crossroads. So what does it mean if you cannot negotiate? These things can be seen during the current electoral campaign in the US. So there would be entire regions where fake news, hate speech, and a disgust of democracy reign. And what that could lead to is actually something that could become a reality. And this is the outcome of a scenario on the Media Landscape 2030, which a young group of journalists conducted before our meeting today, and this was presented today. This shows a multifaceted but very clear, drawn picture. Things can become ugly, and this goes in different directions. It could become authoritarian or hyper-libertarian. So the future is very much a paradox. But what we can clearly see at this moment in time and is the technological situation that publicity, the public will take place. So there is a lot of advance in AI. There is the melting of physical and virtual world. This will have an impact on media and journalism, which will change very much. Parts of our world will be accompanied by a digital identity, which does not only comprise of communication data, but a host of sensory data and behavioral data that we produce every day. How will the media companies use this information, and what is the purpose? Who will be left behind because they lack the media skills? Who will participate? Who is not worth the while to participate based on the structure and the data economy of the capitalism of Silicon Valley? This is only a selection of decisive future questions, which basically nowadays are not questions anymore. Of course, you could agree with the author Robert Musil, the man without qualities. At some point in time side, you can do whatever you want. In the sleaze of powers, it doesn't matter at all. Quote, but it's not necessary. And we have seen that this is so important. We are all in this together. It's do or die. The U.S. activist Cory Doctorow also mentioned this at the end of the conference. But of course, there are also chances and opportunities to have a more inclusive, more resilient public in which independent public journalistic offers would prevail, in which there are discussions and debates on European, on global matters. There could be more AI leading to contributing to the public weal. But again, we did not find a one-fits-all recipe to remedy the situation and to deal with this. But as citizens, but also as a society, we have to think about what kind of a media landscape we want to live in and what is it worth to us. What is the value? And we have to talk about how open we want to be, and we have to also look at the ritualized trench wars and leave them behind. This is also an outcome of the conference, and it tries to set this as a goal, to be a link between different groups, different schools of thoughts, which may not mix very often. The avant-garde, the utopia, the thinkers ahead of time in politics, they all come together. And I would like to conclude with this note. Europe can only design its future, the digital future, together. There's controversial discussions on what this means, but we do see the trend. We need more digital sovereignty, not thinking of isolation or believing that we can create the European Google. This is not absolute sovereignty, but this is a code for being able to do more and creating the frame conditions for creating transparency, participation, media freedom, protection of data, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, what we considered to be normal for a long period of time when it comes to journalism is not a reality. But you don't even have to take a look into the history books. Looking to Hungary would suffice. What is normal and what kind of a media landscape do we want to live? This basically can only be answered in a normative way. It is too important so as to leave it over to the publishing companies or the associations. Public service for the democratic public. This is something that we have to discuss as a society, and I think that I speak on behalf of all of the participants of today's colloquium. We have to make a contribution. The debate is not over, it just started. And now I would like to hand over to Minister of Finance and Vice Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your invitation. I am delighted to be here, not only because I live in Potsdam and I like the Orangery Palace so much, but also because I'm looking forward to the awards ceremony. And I find the discussion that we're holding here tonight highly intriguing. What are the topics shaping our democratic societies in the future, and what can we do for this today? After your presentation, I would have loved to participate in today's event because I think would have really helped all of us who could not participate. Justice is the virtue of social institutions, as is truth with logical systems. This is what Rawls said. Rawls uses this parallel because he wants to make clear that the state cannot just have things happen the way they arise from nature and from the rules of life. And let me also add how they arise from unregulated markets, from the man-made destruction of our natural resources, but also from the social media and the internet that have nothing to do with coincidences and nature. What they need are rules. So this is right at the start of Rawls' book that has the title Theory of Justice. He has the hypothesis we need rules that see to justice and solidarity and equality, but also it is the task that we should stand in for the truth. We should not underestimate this, and we should not leave this up to the free play of forces, and I think Rawls would have agreed to this. Truth is based on facts, and especially in the past months, this has become very clear to many of us. The COVID-19 pandemic did not only mean deep economic and social change, but also a media upheaval, because what we took for granted has fallen apart, and now new respect has been given to those that very long were not looked upon. But there is also a new quality when it comes to handling information. Scientific findings on the SARS-CoV-2 virus were not yet available, and scientific recommendations were very contradictory in March. Also, decisions taken by the authorities were different across Germany, and they still are. Facts, certainties, rumors, and trying to distinguish them was not trivial, as it is very often. Serious and unserious sources and how to distinguish those, that was not trivial either. This is why it is necessary to say, in the political sphere, in the public realm of a democratic system, it has to be possible to agree and refer to a common perception of facts, and as Timothy Snyder said, to believe in truth. And to see to this is the task of democratic institutions and also of civil society and journalists. Because so that facts can really gain full power in public, journalists are indispensable. Their work has to be independent and it has to be legally protected at all times. But everywhere across the world there are big and small autocracies. They fight against journalists that do not publish what they want. They arrest them, they threaten their families, and sometimes regimes do not even hesitate to kill. The development of the media landscape is a highly sensitive indicator of the stability and quality of a democratic order. And this is why it is so important to honor and support those that, despite all resistance and threats, still report on what is needed. They risk everything and are not intimidated, just as recently in Belarus. This is a message that can also emanate from Potsdam through the M100 Sans Souci colloquium and be sent out into the world. Democracy requires public debates, transparent procedures, and accessible facts, because part of the non-codified competence of the fourth power and fourth estate is to organize public reflection, as it is a professional form of democratic conversation. This would comprise questioning and calling into question, research and also collecting information, assessing this and commenting on it. And we should never forget, we should never lose sight of the ability of a society to establish a consensus. Like audiatur altera pars, the journalistic ratio requires to show everything that is relevant, to have everything speak that is relevant, so that citizens can form their own judgment. The central concept is public sphere in this concept, because in the public sphere we constitute the general. We do not have algorithms that are focusing on selection. What is general is what everybody has to know, so that we can all live together in a good democracy. And this is something which becomes especially visible through journalistic work. So today we have to wonder how this can be preserved at the age of digitalization. Let us look back. We can see that hardly anything embodied this journalistic ideal like the traditional weekly and daily newspapers. And even if it appears that way, it is not a matter of the medium, it is that we need to combine serving the common good and also economic purposes. And through the diversity of advertising revenues, we could combine both for a long time. And in the ideal scenario, quality journalism would be the concept of enlightenment as a business model. Now, this is changing continuously, and it is also under combat, and not everybody was heard at the same time equally. And it's not only the tabloid newspapers that sometimes publicize information that might also give rise to criticism, but criticizing would be part of the public sphere. The concept of alternative reporting, for instance, when the alternative newspaper of Taz at the end of the 70s, this was more of a democratic concept than it is these days. But this is also constitutional and constituent of a democracy, have a critical reporting and critical discussion of that reporting. 50 years have passed, and many newspapers of back then no longer exist. The internet has changed the journalistic environment, and digital communication opportunities have arisen. So what we are experiencing is a technology-driven structural change of the public realm. We have new options and opportunities that offer major opportunities. So this is a potential which we need to use for our society and our economy, and we have not been successful in this yet. So we need to take a close look to draw the right conclusions, and let me just give you some food for thought. First point, the business models of the creatives have to be safeguarded for the mediation of information on the internet. Search engines, microblogging services, and social networks are indispensable, just as images are. They structure the services on the internet as they structure public and private communication. These intermediaries are making and providing services that are indispensable. How useful this is what we can see by the use which is taking place in the millions and the economic success of them. The consequences for traditional newspapers are very well known. Advertising customers are going online. The intermediaries receive a major share of the advertising revenues. And in the newsrooms and teams where reflection and research is happening, massive savings have to happen. But one thing is for sure, this newspaper crisis is a financing crisis and not a relevance crisis. And this is a point where we can start. So we can make sure that business models exist and are developed that stand for reasonable journalism. My second point, the future of journalism is something which is characterized by quality, not only by the speed of the spread of information. An online newspaper as well has to offer well-researched information and should not just reflect uncommented opinions, because this is what exists anyway on the social networks for free. And the democratic realm system has to make sure that those journalistic products can be spread and they have to be protected. We cannot just rely on the few digital newspapers that are not for free and that work. So we need to make sure how the production of journalistic content can be supported, even though the government has to refrain from being too intrusive. And this is why the tax rates for print and media products were harmonized. So since 2018, the reduced tax rate is also applicable to online newspapers in Germany. When enabled this at the European level, you have to be able to earn your money with journalism online and offline, and to combine both is maybe more easier now than in the past. Third point, not only for the production but also for the dissemination of journalistic content, we need to make sure that both is strengthened. At the moment, the television is the medium with the largest share in opinion shaping. This has been unchanged. The coexistence of private and public media services in Germany is wise, and this has led to a situation where some troubles have not arisen, especially the elderly. The older generation prefer television, but every year the importance of the online media is increasing. With young people between 14 and 29, the importance of the internet for shaping their opinion is twice as important than in the overall population. A couple of internet portals are amongst the top 10 of media offers for the 14 to 29-year-olds. So the intermediaries are the information selectors of the future, and we want to find journalistic content in them, and this is why we have to wonder what this means for the regulatory landscape. One thing goes without saying: fundamental rights, the freedom of information, and safeguarding democracy is a regulatory task. The free play of forces on the internet is not enough. The stronger the market power of individual actors, we need to make sure that we have regulations that ensure diversity. For instance, when it comes to selection criteria by algorithms, citizens have to be able to understand whether what they see is a shared reality or whether this is just a filter bubble. Fourth point, algorithms can also be different and do different things. The internet is the home of specificities, and sometimes this is the virtual society of singularity, which is even amplified. Algorithms direct the attention of users. They produce a personalized set of recommendations, and mostly they always show the same excerpts of reality. And this is, of course, much different from the traditional subscribers, newspapers, where the editorial team will select the information and comprise this. But what is general can also be made accessible through wise and intelligent algorithms. Fifth point, we have to sanction abuse and need to counteract disinformation campaigns and hate speech. The social media are no area where there is no rule of law, and this is something we should guarantee. And intentional manipulation has to be prevented, especially when this is aimed towards influencing free elections. The instruments for this will have to be readjusted all the time. It is going to be a permanent ambition of the media legislator, but this is something we can tackle, even though it might not be as easy as it was with the newspapers in the past. With the law on the fight of right-wing extremism and hate crime, which will have to stand the test of time after it has been adopted, we have tried to attempt a solution. The Media State Treaty is another attempt. 16 federal states have found a new level of quality for media regulation together. For the first time, intermediary media platforms and user interfaces have become part of this regulation. We have the ban on discrimination and the imperative to be transparent so that equal communication opportunities are created. The visibility of serious information will be enhanced so that journalistic and regional content can be found more easily. And not least, the self-responsibility of the internet community will be enhanced and strengthened through increased requirements towards the accuracy of research. So this treaty is a good contribution to ascertain the diversity and plurality of opinion. A participatory procedure was taking place beforehand. So we had different media outlets, different associations, representatives from the industry, youth protection associations, sports and journalistic associations, health organizations, and many citizens who participated in this process. In the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was another development that was accelerated. The internet and digital intermediaries are the financial winners. And new service providers like Jitsi or Zoom are on the rise, and some city magazines almost had to give up. Federal states tried to fill the gap so that with the Neustart package, we did not only support culture professionals, but also private radio stations. With thousands of articles, TV contributions, and podcasts, journalists tried to encourage and tried to continue with their duty of information. Today, we don't know what the future will hold, but there is one divergence that we have to pay attention to. Google, Amazon, Facebook, YouTube, Netflix, those influential platforms come mostly from outside of Europe. The 20 most used social media come from the United States and China. Russia is also in this with Telegram. We need to be interested in this as Europeans. We need to wonder what this means for our technological and political sovereignty. In the area of digitalization, Europe has the potential to find its own way as an alternative to the government-centered model from China and the approach from the United States, which is mainly based on market forces, which are unregulated. The political and the economic importance of our market is something that enables us to do this, just as our technological capacities. So that, as Europeans, we need to make sure that we can maintain our sovereignty in the age of digital transformation. This concerns the hardware, the software, but also the standard setting. So I would like to make a wish. Digital media services from Europe should become as strong and as diverse as it corresponds to our cultural heritage. Last but not least, an open society needs media it can trust. A culture where truth and the orientation towards the facts and the diversity of opinions count and matter in a critical discourse. This is about a media order that does not deny its origin but has a new orientation, democracy at the digital age. So let us not forget what holds true for the digital media worlds and the democratic societies in general. And this is a lesson from our history. Freedom is not only the rule by the majority, but also the right that protects minorities and diversity. The corona crisis and its impact have created more awareness for what is general and also strengthened the awareness that it's not enough to be selfish. We also have to have the willingness to see to cohesion and a strong democratic order and freedom. A free, good and fact-oriented journalism, without a doubt, is part of the system-relevant activities. Thank you very much.
Ganz herzlichen Dank, Herr Scholz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schulz. Please stay with us for a moment because we would like to have a panel discussion and have a couple of questions as good journalists, questions relating to your speech, but I would also like to invite the other guests to the panel, please.
Are Marina Weisband. She's a German policymaker, now with the Green Party, an expert on all things digital, and born in Ukraine. She's also frequently commenting on Eastern European developments and European-Russian relations. Welcome, Marina Weisband. We have here with us to John Kampfner. He's a longtime correspondent for various British news outlets, an author, a political commentator, founder and CEO of Creative Industries Foundation, and he's currently promoting his new book, Why Germans Do It Better, and I'm sure Herr Scholz would like to know everything about it. Please welcome John Kampfner. And with us to discuss tonight via digital channels are Masha Gessen. She's a writer and columnist for The New Yorker, one of the greatest minds, I may say, that I have personally ever read from. So I'm a big fan. Welcome tonight, Masha Gessen.
Thank you.
And joining us too on a digital channel, Hanna Stjerne. She's the Director General of Sveriges Television, Sweden's national public television, and also a journalist with a long time experience as a reporter, news anchor, and correspondent. Good night, Hanna.
Hi.
So my name is Anna Sauerbrei. I'm Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Tagesspiegel here in Berlin. And I would like to pose the first questions to Minister Scholz because he has been called to the Bundestag and has to leave us soon. And also John because he's on his way out too soon because of his book and new appointments to speak about it. Let me start with you. Fangen wir mit Ihnen an, Herr Scholz.
I would like to start by asking you a question, Minister Scholz. I would like to go back to the beginning of your speech. You talked about the difficult economic situation during the corona crisis, and many of our publishing companies are hit by this. And you said that we have to see to it that there are business models that work. But who is we? Is it the government? Is it the state? Would it be we, the publishing companies? Well, it only can be a cooperation of everyone involved in this, of course. First and foremost, what it means is this. Those who are economically active, producing content, be it on the side of the publishing companies or others, we have to find ways how they can manage in a technologically changing world, and no one will be able to do it for you. So the entrepreneurial creativity and the technological creativity linked to this is essential and means that this is one of many actors who have to do this. But we as a democratic society, as those responsible on this behalf of the state, have to understand enough so that we as a legislator can accompany this in a way so that it works. And in Germany, we are facing a special challenge due to the federal structure which our basic law has created. A large part of the competencies lies in the hand of the 16 Länder, the 16 states. When I was Prime Minister in Hamburg, this is a media city. I worked a lot in this field and tried to develop a common way ahead. And the media contract is something that I actually put on its way many years ago so as to achieve exactly this. And I'm talking about the Interstate Agreement on Media Services. This is also true of many other aspects. Here, the regulatory measures in Germany, in the state, and on a federal level, as well as in Europe, we have to join forces and have to do this together. And we have to tackle the challenge and agree that we want to do this, because otherwise everyone will do their own thing and it will be dispersed. Well, many publishing companies in Germany are indirectly supported by the government because we benefit of the short-term worker pay that is given by the government. And in other countries like Italy, the crisis is so much more severe. Thinking of foundation models, these would be used, etc. Is this something you could imagine to see in Germany? To have public newspapers, government newspapers? Well, if you are clever, you shouldn't say only what I know is the right way to move. Nothing else should be listened to. No, that would lead to disaster. But I think a vision in which we have everything through foundations or the government is nothing that really will work, because this would be linked to lots of coincidences, and it's not guaranteed that this will work. So we need to put effort into seeing to it that it also is economically viable, the things that are developed, that is. And actually, it would be making life too easy if you actually disregard the question, how can you earn money with good journalism, with high quality journalism? We should not shy away from answering that question, and everything else would be only exotic aspects of a media order, which basically has to work with revenues which have to be generated in a sensible way. You mentioned the major platforms as well as the economic problems that are a result of the lack of advertising funding. And this is also something that was mentioned multiple times during the conference. Oftentimes, the call was to regulate these platforms. So what could such a regulation look like, and how can Germany advocate for this in an international context? Well, first of all, I am definitely not a digital native, but I am amazed to see the reservations many have when thinking of these platforms. We, as legislators, be it on a European, on a federal German, or on a state level, we actually think we can do a lot. So how should healthcare insurance work, etc.? Things where now we have lots of rules and stipulations, all of the details. This is national, this is European, etc. But when it comes to the major platforms, the only thing that comes to mind to most of the people is do away with them or succumb to their power. And let me put it this way, this is not complex enough. And that is why we have to have the courage to implement rules. Part of this would be privacy, data protection, privacy legislation. This is absolutely essential. And thinking of the data protection considerations, the question as to where would the data exist, where would the content be processed, this is a local question we have to look into, but it also bears a lots of chances and opportunities, and we have to create the economic we have to lay the economic ground that this is possible in Europe. And two huge changes. If we would stipulate that there has to be interoperability, if it would be possible to communicate from one platform into the other, and if these are not closed networks in itself, then we would also be doing away with the proprietary structures linked to this, where we as users all of a sudden are the prisoners of others, which do not let us out of their world that they put a fence around. This has nothing to do with freedom. Like the other question is there a container with my data that I can make accessible to others? I'm trying to technically describe what is happening digitally. So all of these would be aspects of a media order which we should really regulate. We should have the courage to do that. One last question to you before you may have to leave, but of course it would be wonderful to have you be part of the discussion as well. We will honor Stuhl this evening. He's sitting there in the front row, and he was fired as the editor-in-chief at Index. So thinking specifically of Germany as holding the Council presidency in Europe, what will Germany do so as to better safeguard the freedom of journalism in Hungary? Well, I fear that the couple of months we have up until the end of the year will not be sufficient to negotiate this topic in a conclusive way. But now, together with the European Parliament, as well as in general, this has to be a task we do not shy away from. And actually, I said this on purpose at the end of my speech. Democracy means protecting minorities. And I am very excited, if I may say this as a social democrat, if some people mock liberal democracy. People like myself really worked and fought very hard in the 19th century. This always involves the protection of minorities and the individual right, and it shouldn't be one power determining everything. And it is a misunderstanding if democracy only goes for what the majority wants, and then having a 49% majority can determine what all of the others should do. This is not correct, and this cannot lead to a thriving democracy. And of course, democracy lives off of the fact that it is possible to have a change of government without having major problems linked to this. For example, to those who are no longer in power, and that those newly elected can do everything they want to do. No. And this has to be our principle. And in the European Union, we have to insist that this is non-negotiable. We are a community of liberal democracies, thinking of our understanding of the rule of law, and this holds true and has to be implemented in all of the states of the European Union. For example, to cut funds for the countries that are not acting in line with the new contract that you mentioned? Well, this is one approach, but it's not the only approach. I really would like to emphasize that. I think that we should not give up at this point. I also would like to say this also because unfortunately I cannot be present during the award ceremony, but I'm very happy to know that you will receive this award. But the situation is this. The question as to what democracy is surrounded by a big mystery or secret. The principles that we define are stronger than the reality in which they were born. So if we take a look at the American Constitution, the equality of the citizens, there was also slavery at this point in time, and some of the founding fathers of the United States did not seem this to be a contradiction. But at some point in time, that changed. And also in Germany, you don't have to go too far away, but the equality of men and women was not regulated everywhere under the Basic Law, and it was the Federal Court of the Constitutional Court that ruled this. But it was the internal logic of democracy and freedom that was translated into the Constitution and became a powerful reality. And I am convinced that this is true in all of Europe and all of the member states. Thank you very much. This is a nice transition to an important topic. Oh, there's one more thing I would like to say. If I leave in a moment, then this is due to the fact that the Parliament of this Republic expects that I am present because it is a topic that I am involved in, and I think it is absolutely the Parliament's right to expect that. But I also would like to ask everyone, also those virtually joining, to please bear with me. I would have very much enjoyed a longer discussion. I think that's the best excuse you can have in a democracy.
In the last comment of the minister, the broader subject of this discussion, and this is democracy and what we, the media, contribute to it. And you have, as I said, just published a new book, Why the Germans Did Better, Notes from a Grown-Up Country. And when I was reading that piece that the FT ran on the book, I thought, well, maybe that's part of the problem, that both democracies and the media tend to focus on the problems as we have today. We've talked about all the problems that we have. Do we have to take your perspective more, the perspective of an optimistic outsider?
Well, thank you. Zuerst, ich möchte nur sagen, freue mich hier zu sein.
First of all, I would like to say I am very pleased to be here, and I apologize that I have to leave in a moment. I would have preferred to speak in English so as to be more precise.
Well, my book, which I won't talk about so much today because we're talking more specifically about media policy, but my book is an exhortation. It is a call to Germany to step up, and to step up in a way that is about far more than this rather tired question of the 2%. It is for Germany to look around the Western world and to understand that the Western world and liberal democracy is being undermined from within its heart. It is being undermined within its heart by, in the United States, and from the very heart of power in the White House. It is being undermined in a more clownish way on my island, and it is being threatened by a disruptive Russia and by a strategically ambitious and powerful China. And both within the European Union, but also more broadly, there is a very important role for Germany to play now. And it's a difficult role. It's a difficult role within the context of history, but it's also a difficult role because the more you step up, the more difficulty you give yourself. You enter what I call the gray zone where you have to make difficult decisions, sometimes really rough decisions. But there is no comfort blanket for Germany anymore. There is no protective shield. That doesn't exist, even if, as I think most right-minded people would wish, there is a change of the guard in November in the US. On the specific points, if I may, I very much appreciated the minister's speech. And you said something that I found fascinating, which is that the main problems with mainstream media, with traditional media, are not relevance, they are predominantly financial. And I agree with the finance point. If you look at digital advertising, it varies from country to country, but in many countries, Google and Facebook's stranglehold on digital advertising revenues are 80 to 90%, and something needs to be done about the whole financial underpinning of media. But I would contend that it is also about relevance, and that there is a problem of relevance nowadays. If you take my country, one of the few great global exports that we have, the BBC, publicly funded and still well funded, although the funding is decreasing, it is hemorrhaging young people. Young people are deserting it everywhere. And they're trying, and they're scratching their heads. And I think an interesting challenge for the panel this evening will be, and the discussions earlier were excellent, will be to look at what can be done. The old traditional appointment to view, when the family all sat around the TV set and everybody watched the same thing, people read the same thing. It's changed. In some countries, it's changing less quickly. In Germany, it's changing less quickly. But people now watch what they want to watch, and most importantly, they hear what they want to hear. We have the echo chamber that is only increasing, both on the liberal side and on the nationalist populist side. So the great challenge, I would say, for what one hopes will be a better funded, carefully regulated mainstream media is how does it reconnect or connect with a generation that is only wanting to hear what it wants to hear and only to read what it wants to read. And it's not just a generational thing. We see that in the great culture war that has been taking place in the last 5 years.
Since I can see Marina shaking her head, I'd like to hear what she's got to say.
Thank you so much for your point. I do agree. I do completely agree. But I think if we want to fix media, we don't have to start with the media. We have to start with our surroundings. You're right. We used to sit around the table and watch TV, but we don't anymore. Yet we have a common space. We have our communes. We have our cities. We have our schools or our working place where we have common interests. And what I think is such a well-educated public, such a public with the means to get information from everywhere, with the means to voice their opinion everywhere, we can be more democratic in these areas, in the communes, in the schools, in the working place. And we can come together. And these are the places where we'll need to kind of synchronize the stories that we hear, because we'll need them for discussion, as a base for discussion. And we need this common ground that you really importantly pointed out, and that is being destroyed by Russian trolls, by conspiracy theorists, and so on. So what I think we need is nothing less than a second enlightenment. And I think we need journalists to lead that, because we need journalists as providers of truth, information, and also we need them as educators. And the educational space mustn't be just, oh, how do we sell our stuff? It must be a collective effort, not only by journalists, but also by politicians, also by teachers, by by corporations to give space for communal decision making, because that is what we need journalism for.
Thank you. I would like to now turn to Masha Gessen, because I think the common ground that we're lacking and that many say is missing for our democracies is something that is a much more viral problem in the United States than it is in Europe. And I would like to hear from you, how do you think the media has coped so far with Donald Trump's presidency? And do you think that if we see a change in the presidency after November, will that common ground be repaired?
Well, I mean, if we see a change in the presidency after November, many things will become better, although, I'm a little reluctant to talk about it in terms of repair, right? Because I think that it's incredibly tempting to think of this truly damaging presidency as an isolated event, right? But in fact, the ground for a Donald Trump was prepared over the course of many years, both in the public sphere and in the way that more specifically American politics had transformed and American identity had transformed, right? So it is not a question of bringing things back to where they were. And that, of course, applies to the sense of shared reality, right? This reality was bifurcated before Donald Trump came along. In fact, that is the ground that he stepped onto so fruitfully. But if I may, I want to go back a little bit to some of the other things that were said, and just call on us to question our assumptions a little bit, right? We talk about the marriage of advertising and media as though it were somehow natural. It were like the order of things and the way things always were. There's nothing self-evident about thinking that our news, right, or the information that makes democracy possible is married to the sales of products, right? I mean, there was an extraordinary confluence, especially in the post-World War II world, where advertisers of consumer products needed vehicles for their advertisers, right, for their ads. And those vehicles turned out to be very convenient for the information that we needed to have a shared reality. But again, there's nothing natural about that, nor is there anything natural about entrusting the most important part of democracy, which is the public sphere, to private profit-driven entities. And there shouldn't be anything surprising about that system breaking down, right? I don't think it's a question of fixing that system. I think it's a question of questioning the assumption that system ought to work in the first place. I think it was quite an accident, a fortuitous accident, that it worked for as many decades as it did.
What's the
And the other thing I would like to say is on the subject of relevance, right? I think it's both. It's both ends, right? It's we have the financial problem and we have the problem of relevance. And I think that the question of how do we make things relevant to young people, to people in general who are listening and watching only what they want to watch, may not be exactly the right question, right? Because I think that what we had, for example, in the United States when we had local media in the long ago days, is we had local media, advertiser supported, that carried information that was of interest to only a few people. Right? For example, full reports on the meetings of school boards. But those few people who were truly interested in the full reports of meetings of school board were the people who made local democratic mechanisms work. Right? And it's still true that it was only a few people. Right? So the question is not how do we make more people interested in the meetings of school boards, right? It is how do we deliver that information? How do we make sure that the public sphere functions in a way that people who are invested in democracy have access to the necessary information, and that we can have a kind of sense that we know what's going on in our community, right? Which is ultimately the purpose of journalism, is to show you what is happening when you can't see it. How do we make that community-based process continue?
One question to the first part of your answer. What's the alternative? What's the alternative to advertisement-driven media?
I think the alternative is public funding. I mean, we do not expect the parliament to support itself by renting out space. Why do we expect the fourth estate, an essential pillar of any democracy, to support itself by renting out space?
Olaf Scholz wants to jump in.
Before I leave, possibly there is a chance for a reaction, and I would try to. First, I think that the biggest problem with the new media is the prejudice is coming up again. And what happened in the past is that we learned about many things and that the world is completely different as we expected. And if there is a reduction on things I already know and things that are fitting to what I already know, it is not enough. So for getting a world with a perfect or a better view on the world, for better understanding, it's necessary that we work very hard to get information we have not looked for. And this, I think, is the biggest task if we discuss about social media and all the things happening there, how we can get this experience into the new media as something which is relevant for our democracy and our development as mankind in the end. And I think this is the one big task. Mm-hmm. Second, to the question of advertisements and all this. The development of media in Europe came from entrepreneur that produced some magazines or something similar with advertisements, and time by time there were new texts. It was not first the text, and it was something that happened at the same time, more or less. So I think it's necessary that we understand it's not a tradition of the last 10, 20 or 30 years, but it is just a reason for thinking about how this could be organized for the future. And there will be completely different models which we have not known 20 years ago, but we have to work on them. Third, we have this public broadcasting in Germany, which is similar to BBC in the UK, and there is also competition between different systems, which is quite good for checks and balances and all this. But I'm absolutely sure that the way how we think about politics would not have happened if this would be just public organized media. What, for instance, the famous Spiegel, Zeit and Stern, for instance, did in the history of Germany was something that would not have happened with a solely public organized media situation. So I think we need the mixture we have, and we have to develop it into something different for the future. So thank you for letting me saying this intervention, and thank you for participating. And I wanted to react to Masha Gessen because I loved very much her book about Russia.
Thank you very much, and
Thank you very much.
Have a good way back to the Bundestag. Thank you very much, Ashley. Hanna-Sienne, maybe this is a good moment to turn to you, speaking about public funding, because you work for a news organization that is publicly funded. Would you say that's the model that can be expanded to other media organizations, to newspapers, even to online outlets?
I think it's interesting to look at what really happened during the pandemic, during this spring. Because if you look at the figures from different media companies during the spring, they have gone up really high. If you look in Sweden, you could see that some of our TV broadcast programs, they went up, they doubled their audience during the spring. But also, Sweden is a very digitalized country, and our online news service was also doubled during this period. And when it comes to funding, you could see that a lot of the private media companies also had very large numbers of people coming to them during this period. That's true for, I would say, almost all traditional media outlets in Sweden, except the tabloids. They haven't really gained audience during this period as the others have. And also the trust in social media has gone down during this period. So when it comes to audience figures, traditional media has been very strong. When it comes to trust levels, the trust in traditional media has gone up really high during this period. And also when it comes to funding, and that's interesting. If you look at the biggest newspapers in Sweden, they are more or less now subscription-based. They don't lean so much on advertising as they used before. So they're much more leaning on digital subscriptions. And during this period, they have gained a lot of new digital subscribers, also among young people. And in periods during this spring, they actually opened up their news outlets, the digital news outlets, for free in periods, because the information, the journalism during this spring and this period in time has been really essential for people. So they open it up for freely in periods, and then they close it down only for subscribers some periods. And altogether, they have really gained support during this period. And it's also interesting in one of the most digitalized countries in the world, actually.
Mm-hmm. And do you believe that this is something that will stay on, or is it just a momentum where people are afraid, they seek information, they come back, they return to traditional media outlets, but once this is over, they maybe return to whatever they have been watching or following on YouTube and other channels? Do you think this is the new trust will stay on?
Of course, it was a peak this spring. You see that in the numbers too. But a lot of the trust still stays. We have just got a recent survey when it comes to the trust in SVT, where I work, the Swedish television, and it shows that 30% of the Swedes, they have a higher trust. They rely more on SVT now than they did before the pandemic, and that's really high figures. And then also when I listen to my colleagues on the newspapers, they say that the level of subscription is still much, much higher than it was before. So there are some good signs, but of course it was a peak period this spring.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think we would all like to hear a lot more from you and go on, but this evening is quite short and we still have a very important part ahead of us. So I would like to close this panel now and turn to the even more festive part of the evening and to a person who stands for the courage and persistence that is now needed even in the midst of the European Union these days to defend press freedom and democracy. Szabolcs Gyula is here with us tonight, but we will now first see a film on his work and his life, and we will then hear from the laudatory speaker, the Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner, Dunja Mijatovic. Thank you all again for being with us here tonight, physically and digitally, and now on to the film. Film up.
Ja, meine Damen und Herren, das ist die schöne neue Zoom-Realität.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the new Zoom reality.
Hiccup, but I'm told it's only a matter of seconds. So I ask for your patience. And Ms. Mijatovic, the commissioner, she's already here. We saw her already on the screen. And the colleagues are trying to solve that issue.
Journalism is about choosing the right side. When you work in this field, you choose to take the side of those who seek out and tell the truth. You choose to think and act with independence, freedom, and objectivity. You choose to serve the public good. This is part of the appeal of journalism, attracting so many young people who dream about exposing injustices and corruption, holding to account those in power, and hoping to change society for the better. I think this sort of concrete idealism can be found in the work of Szabolcs. Over the past decade, you have remained loyal to the ideals and values of a form of independent journalism which delivers public service. This is all the more honorable because it happened in a country where the majority of news outlets have lost their independence. Despite yourself, Szabolcs, you have become a symbol of the struggle for media freedom in Hungary. You were an intern at Manager magazine when the editorial staff left after a change in the editorial line in 2007. You continued at Kossuth Radio until the team was suddenly disbanded when the editorial line changed. At 30, you experienced editorial pressure for the third time when in 2014 you left Origo, a well-reputed news outlet which was placed under government control. And now you have been dismissed from Index after you wrote an article in June warning that the staff and the independence of the news site were in grave danger. It is therefore a great pleasure for me to give this laudatory speech, even though in cyberspace, in your honor. Szabolcs, as the 2020 recipient of the M100 Media Award. Your dismissal and the subsequent resignation by more than 70 of your colleagues at Index represent a huge blow to media freedom and deprive the Hungarian public of yet another reliable and independent source of information. Indeed, under your guidance, Index managed to Index is a magazine that is also now one of the symbols, and it's also very much related to everything you did. Millions of readers you reach daily would agree that you place the interest of the Hungarian public for serious and reliable journalism first. Unfortunately, the situation in the media is not Hungary's only problem. In fact, what has been happening to the press in Hungary has also been happening to other key sectors of the country. In the past weeks, we are seeing hundreds of students, professors, actors, and film directors occupying the Academy of Drama and Film in Budapest to protest against the privatization of this very respected institution. This is just the latest episode in a decade-long drama in which democratic institutions have been dismantled, judges have been removed, journalists silenced, academic freedom almost eliminated, and NGOs harassed and intimidated. In Hungary, we do not see, I would say, the spectacular forms of repression or intimidation that we see in some other European countries. The repression is subtler than that. It comes from unilateral and obscure board decisions like the one through which you were dismissed. It comes from legislation making it almost impossible to carry out independent work. It comes from decisions that selectively assign advertising revenue so that those who displease the authorities are forced to reduce or cease activities. The recent decision of the Hungarian Media Council not to renew the license of Klubrádió is a good illustration of the types of pressure independent media face in the country. That the media in Hungary is in danger is no news, unfortunately. Already in 2010, one of my first visits as a newly then elected OSCE representative on freedom of the media, I was in Hungary. And the legal analysis I presented to the government then showed that the media package was due to be adopted would seriously restrict media pluralism, curb the independence of the press, eradicate the autonomy of the public service media, and have a chilling effect on freedom of expression and public debate, all of which are essential for democracy. The year after, it was Thomas Hammerberg, who held the position I hold now at the Council of Europe, who raised similar concerns. More recently, a report by the European Centre for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom showed an acute risk of political interference in media independence in Hungary through state regulation of resources. The government has so far denied that there is any repression of media freedom. On 31st of July, a few days after your dismissal from Index, an alert concerning your case was created on the Council of Europe platform dedicated to the protection of journalists. The government of Hungary replied 2 weeks later with a few lines stating that your dismissal was just an issue of labor law and that Hungarian legislation fully ensures journalistic and editorial freedom in line with international standards. I disagree. What we see in Hungary is continuous interference by economic forces close to the government, which is trampling media freedom through a combination of the concentration of media assets and advertising revenues. Despite the grim situation, the battle for a free media and for democracy in Hungary is far from over. Hungarian society is showing strong resilience, which I welcome and support. You are part of that resilience, Szabolcs. You have defended the values of form of journalism that does not follow the changing tastes of political and economic forces. A journalism in which professional news teams, not external operators, choose the content. You made the choice to stand up for a newsroom able to expose injustices, misbehavior, and political responsibilities fearlessly for the public good. In your farewell speech to your colleagues at Index soon after your dismissal, you said that it was clear that Index was a strong fortress that someone wanted to destroy. You said you were offered a deal, including monetary compensation, if you did not speak about your dismissal and the reasons behind it. You took a stand and refused. You insisted on the need to inform Hungarians of what had happened to you and to Index over the years when the staff had felt under increasing pressure. Ne hallgassunk. Let's not be silent, you said. I could not agree more. None of us should be silent. We must all speak out. You see, every time journalist independence is undermined, it is democracy that is eroded. The level of freedom and pluralism enjoyed by journalists represents a litmus test for the state of a democracy. And unfortunately, Hungary is failing this test. This is why we too must choose our side. We must stand up to protect the journalists like you, Szabolcs, from undue interference with their work. We must choose to persist and help those in Hungary who are trying to strengthen democracy and accountability. We must step up our efforts to re-establish media diversity and pluralism. Events like today's ceremony are a good opportunity to honor brave people like Szabolcs Dól. However, they should not be just one-off happenings. We must use such events to keep the spotlight on Hungary and any other country where media freedom is endangered and persist in defending and promoting human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Through your work, Szabolcs, you choose the side of those who defend these values. Someone felt that you stood in the way of private interests. They choose to dismiss you, hoping to silence you, but they choose the wrong side of history. In cyberspace like that. And we are here to reassure you and your colleagues that we will never give up, that we will not be silent. Ne hallgassunk.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that I would be standing here before you in Potsdam, thanking you for this important award. 2 months ago, I was sitting in a newsroom in Hungary as an editor-in-chief, fighting for the staff of the country's most visited news site to stay together. 2 months ago, I was leading the tightest knit newsroom of Hungary that always took a stand by and fought for the freedom of the press. Freedom of the press that meant for us that we could work without external pressure and that only the reader's interests mattered. That is why hundreds of thousands, later millions of people had been reading us. And 2 months ago, I was dismissed from the helm of this newsroom because I let the public know that the staff feels that the site and they were in danger. I let the public know that it jeopardizes a news site if outside powers try to interfere with its operation for unclear reasons. I was dismissed because I drew a clear line showing where the staff thinks freedom of the press ends. My sacking was a clear limit for the staff. All of the journalists resigned and left the site behind without a word. The site that was not only their workplace, but an important part of their lives. We didn't ask for a lot. We only wanted our two main principles to be respected. Years ago, we declared that there is not a good news site without editorial independence and an undisturbed staff. We held on to this right up to the very end. We've never let anybody tell us what to write or what not to write, and whom we can work with and how. We still don't know the exact reasons why our values came under attack and why some people wanted to disintegrate our organization. Even though the name of a government politician was uttered while they tried to force the organizational overhaul onto us, we never regarded this as a political matter of the parties. The staff just wanted them to maintain their autonomy against all outside forces, and I am proud of my colleagues for proving that these values really matter to them. The entire world could see the uplifting and heart-wrenching video of these honest and dutiful people lined up to hand in their designations. That was the end of the largest news source of Hungary as we knew it. The site that hundreds of thousands of people had read every day collapsed in a single moment. Some people tried to give intentionally misleading explanations for my firing and the quitting of the staff. The media linked to the Hungarian government had immediately started a denigration campaign against me and my co-workers. They wanted to present us as criminals. My former boss, the representative of the proprietor, the person who fired me, had said that in Germany, police would have taken me away in handcuffs. But I see that here in Germany, you think differently. You awaited me with an award here in Potsdam instead of a ball and chains. Thank you for that. But this honor doesn't only belong to me, but the entire outgoing staff who had taken a stand by free and independent press all throughout. Almost the entirety of the 90-strong newsroom had quit and proven that they are not willing to go into bad compromises and work under external pressure. They should all be here by my side. I thank you all on their behalf. 2 months ago, I only had the opportunity for a short farewell in the newsroom. I told my colleagues, let's not stay silent. Let's not stay silent about our story. Let's not stay silent about our principles, about the truth, and never stay silent about the news on what is happening in Hungary, in Europe, and around the globe. since this is what freedom of the press is all about, telling as many people as possible what precisely is happening in the world. And my former colleagues, my friends I can say, have understood this well, and they are fighting against silence. They are now trying to put a news site together called Telex, a news site that can write freely about anything and anybody, a site that is independent from politicians and parties, from oligarchs and other economic actors, a site that only keeps the interests of its readers at heart. And I believe this community deserves all the support they can get for creating and operating this new site. Then they can write media history once again as they already did 2 months ago. And what my former colleagues did, how they took a stand, is no private matter. It's not the internal affair of a corporation. More so, it's not even a Hungarian matter. Standing up for free and independent press is not only about Hungary, but about our common European values. This is how this story became a European cause. And I thank you all very much for using this award to shine a light on this European cause. Thank you. Dankeschön.
Unfortunately, the microphone is not on and the interpreters in the booth cannot hear what is being said.